All right, everyone have a handout they can see? Oh, Tom, okay. Sorry, I left them all at the back now. There you go. All righty. Well, I guess we can get started then. Thanks to our substitute sound guy for making sure we stream this. So again, since it's Pentecost, I figured of the list of controversial issues we could talk about, immigration might be a good one. Can you change it? Click over it, Tyler, so my remote will work. There we go. Great. Thank you. All right. And what I based this on today, and it's mentioned in the handout, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Commission on Theology and Church Relations, so LCMS-CTCR. As I have district convention, I have to bone up on all these acronyms, make sure I remember what they are. But so it's a group of seminary professors and pastors that works on, when there's theological questions, it gets submitted to the CTCR, and they write things up and send it back, and it gets published, and then we can refer back to it when we're dealing with different difficult theological issues.
Just and they, an addendum to that,
yeah.
You know who chairman of the CTCR was years ago for many years? Pastor Gaff.
Okay, so Pastor Kapfer, who was pastor here in the early 80s, was on the CTCR. So that's gives you an idea of the caliber of people that are on it. But they wrote a report and a Bible study called "Immigrants Among Us: A Lutheran Framework for Addressing Immigration Issues." And so I kind of summarized some of it here. If you're you can look at the on the LCMS website and find it. I was going to click a link, but when I did share a link, it was all just a bunch of random letters But you can find both the report and the Bible study on the LCMS website. And what it does is it doesn't give us concrete answers, but it gives us a way of thinking through biblically how to deal with these issues. All right, and so and they're kind of outlined here. So first we'll look at immigrant neighbors, past and present, biblical teaching on loving our neighbors. So what does the Bible say about immigrants broadly defined? Second, God's law, civil law, obeying the fourth and fifth commandments. So what are we supposed to do to obey government? 3, living in God's two realms, citizens of heaven and earth. A reminder that we're not only citizens of, or most of us, citizens of the United States of America, but we're also citizens of heaven. We all are. And so how do we balance those out, or the fact that we're living in the kingdom of the church and the kingdom of the government? And then 4th is, who is my neighbor? And how do we understand that? All right. So, Holy Scripture does not address specific question of church's attitude towards illegal or undocumented immigrants, but it does speak to the basic attitude of God's people towards immigrants. Aliens, sojourners, strangers are some of the words that are used as are translated into English in the Bible to refer to people that we'd refer to in discussions today as immigrants. All right, and so that recognizes giving absolute biblical answers to an issue Scripture does not directly address. So again, we want to make sure that we speak where the Bible speaks on things, but we also want to make sure that we're not moving the Bible into contemporary issues in a way that is unjust or to either the Bible or the contemporary issue. Biblical values can and should inform our attitudes toward and actions among immigrants, even as we wrestle with challenging social and political questions. All right, so a few Bible passages. First couple come mostly from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Could someone read this one for us?
When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
All right, and then Deuteronomy 24. Could someone read this for us?
You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers, or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your tents. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor in counsel. Lest he cry against you to the Lord, and you be guilty of sin. You shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or the father, or to the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this.
All right, so why were the Israelites to love the sojourners and treat them fairly? What do those passages tell us about?
They were mistreated in Egypt, and God didn't want them to
Right.
wish that on anyone.
Right, yeah. So remember who you are. Remember who you were. Remember when you were an immigrant, when you were in strangers in a strange land, when you were in Egypt, and how you were mistreated there. Don't do that to the people here because you know what it's like. Exactly. Anything else?
Pick up the screen, there's a phrase, or take a widow's garment in pledge. What was that?
That's a good question. I don't remember for sure off the top of my head. But that's the other thing. That so sojourners are linked with fatherless or orphans, and then widows as groups of people that God is watching out for, and God is making sure that they are cared for, because they're bottom of the rung, but they're the ones who could easily be oppressed, mistreated, don't have anyone to speak for them. And so God is saying these are the groups of people you need to take special care of and make sure that you don't mistreat, because it's going to be very easy for you to mistreat them. All right. Any other thoughts? All right, so that's, again, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Again, all right, and then here's another Deuteronomy passage, similar idea. Could someone read this for us?
At the end of every 3 years, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in the same year and lay it up within your towns. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the sojourner, fatherless, and the widow who are within your towns, shall come and eat and be filled, but the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands that you do.
All right, and then Deuteronomy 26 here.
When you have finished paying all the tithe of your produce in the 3rd year, which is the year of tithing, giving it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow, so that they may eat within your towns and be filled. 13.
Sorry, didn't delete all the words.
Then you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the sacred portion out of my house, and moreover I have given it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your commandments that you have commanded me. I have not transgressed any of your commandments, nor have I forgotten them.
All right, so which groups were without land or inheritance? Levites, and who else? Fatherless, orphan, and sojourner. And so how were the Israelites to treat them?
They were to give them part of their tithe, part of the money.
Right. All right, so every 3 years they give a tithe, and that tithe gets divided among these people who can't provide for themselves. And we see this somewhat in the story of Ruth. Remember what happens with Ruth? So Ruth and her and Naomi return, and then Ruth goes to Boaz's field, because Boaz is actually following all the commandments, which means that he doesn't cut, glean, harvest all the way to the edges of the field. The edges of the field are to be left so that the poor, the Levite, the widows, orphans can go harvest at the edges of the field. So Boaz does that. That's how God provided for the people who couldn't provide for themselves. All right. All right, and just to make sure that show that this isn't just, Pentateuch, Leviticus, Deuteronomy stuff. Here's a couple prophet verses that talk about this. Zechariah 7, could someone read this for us?
And the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another, do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise evil against another in your heart.
All right, so what does God command concerning justice for sojourners, widows, and others who dwell with the people of Israel?
They should provide for them.
Provide for them. Don't oppress. So yeah, do not oppress them. And the negative commandment. Okay, so don't oppress them, but yeah, provide for them.
Show kindness and mercy for them also.
Yeah.
It's more than just, sort of passively.
Right. Yeah. So there's the passive. Okay, please don't oppress these groups, but then also the active care for these groups, and this is how you can do it. All right, and then again back in Exodus, why are they supposed to care for sojourners? You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. And then Psalm 146:9. Could someone read this for us?
The Lord watches over the sojourners. He upholds the widow and the fatherless. But the way of the wicked he brings to ruin.
All right. So again, why were the Israelites to love the sojourners and treat them fairly?
It's God's commanded them to do that.
God-
They should remember
Yes.
that their relatives
Yes.
were the sojourner.
Yes, your ancestors were sojourners in Egypt. They were oppressed there. Don't oppress people in your land.
I would define sojourner as a traveler. How do you think they're defining?
That's a good question. And so sojourner seems to be have more of a permanent.
Yeah.
People who are not not Israelites, but are living in the land. And following the commands. And there's a couple different things. We'll get to some of that, but yeah, that's an important thing to talk about too as we talk about immigration, is making sure we're using the right words and defining the words correctly. All right. And then Malachi. What does the prophet Malachi have to tell us about this?
And I will draw near to you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, against the adulterers, against those who swear falsely, against those who oppress the hired worker in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, against those who thrust aside the sojourner and do not fear me, says the Lord of hosts.
All right, and so again, what basic needs are addressed here, and what other groups of vulnerable people are mentioned along with the sojourners?
Well, one of the basic needs is they should get fair wages.
Right.
For their work. And the widow.
Yeah, get fair wages, get paid on time. Like I mentioned other places. Yeah, and again, God's watching. God is telling them to watch out for these groups of people who may not be able to watch out for themselves, who could easily be oppressed: the widows, the orphans, and the sojourners. All right, and then Galatians reminds us too of the importance of then what we do as Christians. Someone read this for us.
And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith.
All right, and then Hebrews 13:2.
Do not neglect to show hospitality
All right, so how should believers treat strangers, those outside the household of faith?
And they should open up their homes.
Open up their home. Hospitality was one of the marks of the early church. And again, we see in Galatians especially, that's where I know Paul spent all this time talking about the Judaizers had been there and saying, well, you know, all you Gentile converts are second-class citizens, and Paul saying, no, you're all the household of faith now. As Christians, that's other stuff doesn't matter as much.
Showing hospitality was not just a Jewish thing. It was
Right.
also part of the Greek culture.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a part of the wider culture too, but the Christians were supposed to kind of do it even more so than some of the, and without necessarily the expectation of it being returned that would have been present in those other groups. All right. Any questions on that first part about God's care for the sojourners that way? All right, then part two that comes up when we're talking about immigration is God's law, civil law, and the neighbor obeying commandments. And we'll read together in unison the fourth commandment here. So, honor your father and your mother. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. All right. And then Romans 13, 1 through 7. Could someone read this for us?
Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God and the avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed.
All right. So how are we to respond to the governing authorities? Obey them, right. And why do we obey them? They're God's servants, right. And Luther makes that connection through the fourth commandment that God established parents over their children, and that's kind of the source of all these other authorities we have in our lives. Anyone remember, too, we've talked about this, I think, before. So when Paul's telling the Romans in Romans 13, obey the governing authorities, this is a nice, good Christian king, right? No, a little laughter there, okay. Because who's the authority he'd be telling them to obey here? Nero, right, yeah. The Roman emperor who's going to use Christians as torches in a few years. So kind of always important to kind of keep that in mind too. And of course, other places he said, that you obey your governing authorities, at least partly because when you're persecuted for being Christians, then people can tell you're being persecuted for being Christians, not persecuted because you're breaking these other laws. And that's going to be a witness that way. And again, as Paul's writing to this group of Christians in Rome, that their experience of authority is going to be different than compared to some, people living out in the boondocks. But all right, and so how do these verses inform our response to immigrants and immigration law?
It depends on how you take that.
Okay. Yeah, see, this is where the conflict happens. We've got love, so we love our neighbors, God cares for the immigrants, and obey the laws. So, yeah. Now we're in the messy middle.
In my sense is, yes, I'm to obey the law, but I'm to obey the law with my Christian faith in a manner that it's not, what would you say, let me adjective, that it's calm, that it's done, where you separate, where people are dealt with respect.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to remember whether I've got this coming up later. I think I might have it a little later on. But, you know, when the people come to John the Baptist asking for advice on what to do, John doesn't say, okay, well, you can't be tax collectors, you can't be soldiers anymore now that you're Christian, you've repented. But instead, okay, you could be a tax collector, but don't extort, don't take more than you're supposed to. Or, okay, yes, you can be a soldier, but don't use your soldier ability to go around and extort people. You know, that it's you live the vocation, but you live the vocation out in a good, God-fearing way. And so that we apply that there too. Good thought, though. All right, Colossians 4 here, what does this have to tell us?
Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person.
All right, and so what do these verses say about our use of language, including in our discussion of immigration law? Be careful what you say, yes, and how you say it, right. And this is where, the example from the Bible study gives is this. So Christians who speak of undocumented immigrants may seek to affirm the basic dignity of immigrants following the 5th and the 8th commandments, showing sensitivity to their plight and the need to promote their well-being. They may place lesser emphasis, though, on current demands of civil law regarding legal or illegal status. And some may even disagree with current immigration law, considering it inadequate to address the fair treatment of immigrants. On the other hand, Christians who speak more readily of illegal immigrants, so are you talking about illegals or undocumented, is the definition they're dealing with here, who speak more readily of illegal immigrants focus on the need for obedience to civil law, 4th commandment, as it applies to current immigration law. They may be viewed as then insensitive to the plight of immigrants and uncritical concerning problems in current immigration law that may not adequately address fair treatment. All right? So that kind of makes sense. So again, using the words properly, using them how, and because otherwise it goes, so you need to be accurate in your words, and use your speech gently and with salt, so that you're not, offending people in the way you're speaking. The example that they gave in the Bible study, and I don't think I included it, was that you had a church that was working with immigrants, but one of the members was on the city council railing against illegal immigrants, and so then you had people coming to the church going, wait a minute, I don't know that I feel comfortable at this church because of your member who's on the city council talking about illegal immigrants all the time, and so how do you balance those two needs?
Question?
What?
Oh, I thought maybe that was a question.
Well, I mean, it was sort of a question. I don't know what.
Well, you balance it with, you see both sides.
Yeah.
In a sense, like common ground.
Mm-hmm.
You try to have some type of common ground, and, as far as a Christian, you want to make sure you're respectful, but you also have to honor the situation of law.
Right.
And respect that as well.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult unless you practice it.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it takes work, and we're going to make mistakes, but fortunately we have a forgiving God to help us as well.
We don't practice it a lot.
No.
We don't listen.
Right.
We don't acknowledge. We don't do all those things.
Right.
So we have problems.
Yep. All right, and so that's what The last 2 pages of your handout get at some of this, and I've got some slides that cover similar things. So who are we talking about with immigrants and where they're coming from, some of these things. From Concern Worldwide here, so a refugee is people who flee their homes, cross an international border, and cannot return because they fear their lives are in danger. IDPs, that's internally displaced persons. They flee their home for the same reasons as refugees, but haven't crossed an international boundary. Asylum seekers flee their home, claim they're refugees, but their status has not been definitively determined yet. And you can see in the immigration terms, refugee is a legal definition, and there's steps that have to have been done before you're legally called a refugee. And then migrants are people who are voluntarily leaving their homes to settle permanently in another region or country for a variety of different reasons. And so again, recognizing who these people are, where they're coming from, why they're coming is a challenge, because that sometimes seems to just be conflated, that everyone's coming from the same places for the same reasons, and that's not the case. Yeah, Connie?
So you're saying to go back, say, 100 years, why did most of our families come?
Right.
So under which classification would they come? Because some left because of religious reasons.
Right.
And some
Yeah.
left, a lot of them left because of economic reasons.
Yeah.
And so maybe that can give us a little bit, it's kind of like the same thing as remembering what it was like in Egypt.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And having some empathy for the individual.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so that same idea, just like the Israelites were told, remember when you were immigrants and sojourners in Egypt, remember that now. So we're all a nation of immigrants whose ancestors came here, again, for a variety of reasons, and sometimes overlapping reasons. Sometimes it was both economic and, religious persecution, or, that part of the religious persecution they were facing was that you didn't get the good land, or so there were economic hardships going along with it, those sorts of things. So yeah.
But there's a big difference with today in that you may have had those reasons, but those reasons didn't need to be there for your status. In other words, those people immigrated, didn't matter what reason they were immigrating, they were allowed in legally. Today, that's important for determining their legal status for coming.
Right.
And it wasn't back then.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another thing is the immigration law and how people are recognized changes for that. I mean, one of the debates that happens every Christmas. Okay, are Jesus, Mary, and Joseph refugees? Yes or no? When they go to Egypt, are they refugees? I mean, so specifically, okay.
No, they're IDPs.
Okay, so yeah, so are they refugees or are they IDPs? Because they're within the Roman Empire, but they're also changing areas, states sort of within the Roman Empire, because Herod's after them, but the person in control of Egypt isn't. But it's all under Roman Empire. So that would be like, okay, if I flee across the Mississippi River because I'm worried about what Governor Reynolds is going to do to me, or the other way around, if I'm worried about what Governor Pritzker's doing to me, so I'm going to come to Iowa to.
But it wouldn't apply because we're talking citizenship.
Right, well, and of course we talk about citizens. Remember, just because you were in the Roman Empire didn't make you a citizen. You had to go through all these things. We'll also, depending on how much time we have, look at how Paul uses his citizenship. That Paul's got a special status that he's able to use that some of the other people are not and don't have. That allows him some special status in how he's able to travel around the Roman Empire, how he's treated when he's arrested, and that kind of thing. So again, refugees apply for protection through the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. Government likes acronyms almost as much as the church does. Or directly at U.S. embassies while still outside of the U.S. In fiscal year 2024, United States resettled approximately 100,034 refugees, highest number in 30 years. After extensive vetting, refugees are then referred to nonprofit agencies to be resettled, or at least, again, that used to be the case.
Any idea where most of those?
It varies. I mean,
In the Middle East or mostly?
yeah, I mean, the most recent one, I think mostly Middle East, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But that's, again, how we get, the Laotians or Hmong in Des Moines, the Somalis and others in Minnesota. If you watch what's the Clint Eastwood movie? Gran Torino. When Clint Eastwood's character is complaining about all the refugees, who does he blame? The Lutherans. The Lutherans. All these refugees are here because the Lutherans. So, yeah.
Aren't there caps on all of them?
Yeah, and so again, that's part of why knowing these definitions is important, because there's caps on different groups. So again, fiscal year 2024, 100,000. Was supposed to be 125,000 this year. Things have changed since January, and those have declined.
You have it up there, but they also have a lottery too.
Right. Yeah. And again, these refugees have gone through a process to determine that they're official refugees, but then they still have to go through a lottery to see if they can get placed in the U.S. or not, and they have to hang out waiting in a tent, often a refugee camp in a second country before they can get to the third country where they want to be. So U.S.
What about the special thing like HB1?
Well, we'll get to some of that. We'll get to some of that. All right. So U.S. law requires asylum seekers to file for protection while physically present in the U.S. or at a land border. So refugees, you can apply at an embassy, you apply in a foreign country and go in. To be an asylum seeker, you need to be in the U.S. or at a border. May have arrived on a visa or other legal pathway, or apply defensively once they're in removal proceedings.
So what used to be the most common was probably Cubans?
I mean, depending on the year, certainly. Right. So here in Ames, this is who we often have to deal with. So Emmanuel, can I put you on the spot? You have a F1 visa? Yes, okay, very good. So F1 visas are full-time students. J1 is an exchange visitor, so that's like the visiting scholars, professor who's just here for a time, that kind of thing. Again, 95% of the people at Iowa State have that student visa. 2.6 have J1 and others. Some have others, and then some are dependents. So they're either here as a dependent of someone with one of these other visas, or a dependent of a U.S. citizen.
Do you know where our choir director, So Young, where she fits in on that?
Well, so that's a fun thing, and I was going to mention that. So that's one of the challenges in working with them is that these visas have restrictions. So when So Young was our choir director, every semester I had to sign a form saying that yes, she was employed as our choir director, and turn that back in, and that got submitted because with her visa she could only do certain kinds of things. And I think part of it was because it was supervised under Dr. Rohde, that it was seen as educational and not just a plain old ordinary job, and so yeah, that sort of thing going on. But yeah, so these come with restrictions. All right, and we're running short on time a little, but that's okay. Again, yeah, nice, easy, simple issue, right, Al? All right. So again, we also then, and we've talked about this, it's a complex issue, advocating for our neighbors, loving and caring for them, and obeying the laws, and trying to figure out how we balance that. Again, we got guidance sent to us by LCMS essentially saying we're not required, and churches and schools are not required to either know or disclose the immigrant status of people who are just here taking advantage of our services. All right, again, we're citizens of two countries. John tells us again to love not just in things, but in action, not just words. James tells us to not hold partiality, talks about clothing and wealth status and every economic status and everything connected with that, but don't make distinctions. That God's chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs in the kingdom, who is promised to love. All right, another example they give in this Bible study is, should a Lutheran congregation employ a lawn service to maintain church landscaping, knowing that a good share of the employees of that company may not be documented? This is where one of the examples of where does the rubber hit the road? Okay, yeah. So, but why do these companies hire undocumented people? They're cheaper. And what did God tell us about?
No.
Well, partly cheaper and partly they're the ones that'll do the work, right?
You asked Barry Thomas when he's alive.
Yeah.
He couldn't get Americans to do.
Oh yes, right. I mean that's the other side too, is who will do the work and that kind of thing. So, yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yep. Or when the C2 Star was putting this together, they got a pastor who said, one of our members has a pretty good theological education but is here illegally. He's been in charge of a Hispanic congregation for some time. Well, we get in trouble with the law if we call and employ him. If we ask him to leave to return to his home country, he won't be able to minister to his people here or support his family here or there. So dealing with that. All right, just to keep us going. So again, Paul uses his citizenship to save himself when he's arrested in Jerusalem. He asks the tribunes the Roman soldiers are going to beat him up after they've saved him from the Jewish mob, and then they find out he's a Roman citizen and are kind of scared. And again, the tribune says, "I had to buy my citizenship," and Paul says, "Well, I'm one from birth." And then they withdraw immediately and get hands off and get really scared because you don't mess with a Roman citizen because that messes with Rome. All right, and then same thing then, Paul uses his citizenship to go stay at Caesarea and get Festus to give him an all expenses paid trip to Rome to go see the emperor. So. Yeah.
Bring Rome to us.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like love should be the overarching
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
way we approach
Yeah.
it. And, I guess if we know that somebody's here illegally, maybe we can help that person find a legal path
Right.
to be able to stay here. But we really need to extend a loving heart to them, to everybody. There was a quote that I read this morning someplace as I was reading, and it was, God doesn't need our good works, but our neighbor does.
Right. Yep.
And I thought, yes, I'm coming to immigrants. They're our neighbors.
Yeah.
And the government has certain legal
Right.
terms for them.
Yep.
We know them as our neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Treat them in the way that we should treat them.
Yeah.
And
I acknowledge what you're saying. We're the government, and I'm not going to jail and doing something illegally, but I'm going to have compassion, helping someone. And I think that's basically what you're saying, that we shouldn't be abusive or anything like that. But we also have to follow the law.
follow the law.
Yep.
The law. And because you follow the law doesn't mean you're uncompassionate. You're just following the law. People need to understand that.
Well, kind of going along with that, and Gary, I'm sorry to pick on you, but I looking through stuff as I was getting ready for this. Do you remember what we had to do for Zach and Anna?
We had to write letters
Right.
for Zach saying,
Yep.
yes, we and Hannah are married. I and
Yep.
Hannah are married.
Mm-hmm.
We really do love each other. We do want to really well
Yep.
live in this country. We're not
Mhm.
sneaking around trying to sneak Anna in. She was from
Right.
the Czech Republic.
Yep. So we've got a family here. Husband had been going on mission trips to the Czech Republic. Fell in love, brought her back here, and then try to figure out, okay, how does her citizenship go? And so Gary and I and some others were asked, because we knew them, we had to write letters to the state, to the immigration, saying, you know, yes, they're married, yes, they actually love each other, they didn't just get married so that she can get her citizenship, go through this stuff. So we had to mail that to them. They mailed it in. 15 to 18 months later, they get forms back and say, okay, then you can keep going on this process. So again, recognizing this is a long process. I think Anna's finally gotten through it, but I don't remember for sure. But all right, and then a couple other things. And Pastor Mark can talk about this. Probably you can ask him later about it. But one of the groups mentioned in the CTSR report is Ysleta Lutheran Mission Human Care in El Paso, Texas, right on the border between Texas and Mexico. Pastor Mark's taking groups there for spring break trips over the years. And so again, this Cuban refugee gets to that point, that border part there, and says that he was grateful to be welcomed there. In McAllen, Texas, sorry, this was small, I didn't have time to, but Upbring New Hope Children's Center is an RSO of the LCMS, works with the Office of Refugee Resettlement to provide emergency shelter for undocumented children, and they live in a home until they're able to get matched up with so they took care of children, and were there until they were able to be reunited with a sponsor or a family member. During President Trump's first term, Melania, his wife, visited this place. Again, McAllen's on the border between Texas and Mexico. So those are some of the ways that people have been active in there. Then about this report said that one prominent evangelical scholar and immigration expert said, of all the church pronouncements and studies on U.S. immigration over the last 2 decades, this LCMS reports the most sophisticated, nuanced integration of biblical analysis with the challenges posed by contemporary immigration concerns. All right. And then to close, you may remember a little bit about a little uproar a few months ago about, Lutherans laundering money. President Harrison, in his letter responding to that, said these things. LCMS loves all people. We believe the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. We're sinners loved by Christ, and Christ tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves. When our congregations, pastors, and people come into contact with individuals who are not legally in the U.S., particularly when such individuals find themselves in our churches, we welcome them. We tell them about Jesus' forgiveness. We also always urge them and often assist them in doing the right thing, becoming legal residents. LCMS is officially pro-immigrant. Our church was founded by German immigrants. And then skipping things. Again, during his first term, President Trump and the First Lady visited Upbring. The President wanted to ensure that the institution would be a place to deliver outstanding care to unaccompanied minors. That agency has been quietly doing this work since that visit. They take the work with profound seriousness and love. They did not and do not deserve the broad brush of disdain brought upon them when they got accused of money laundering because we're helping refugees. When Michael Flynn and Elon Musk were starting Doge and looking for all these. No, that's in Texas.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, they painted everything with a broad brush, which is why he had to write about this.
I'm talking about the Lutheran Family Services.
There's a bunch of those. Yeah.
The only reason I say it because I served on
Right.
Family Services
Yep.
in Colorado.
Yeah, no, there were a bunch of those, and that was the.
I knew it was wrong.
Yeah, that was the issue. Second, our immigration laws are a mess. I can safely say our LCMS people are all for removing criminal bad actors from this country. Caesar beareth the sword not in vain. There are indeed millions who have broken federal immigration law. This is wrong. It's also true that millions have been enticed and encouraged to enter illegally by contradictory American voices at all levels, federal, state, and local. I cannot but be sympathetic to their plight. At the same time, a well-regulated border, sound immigration policy, and welcoming space for persecuted refugees are all fundamental parts of the God-pleasing answers to the question, who will contribute to this marvelous and blessed American experiment?
What was the result of that? Did they find the findings? That's a great statement.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
What happened?
Well, that was all in February, and well, government stopped paying, letting refugees in, so they don't have to pay these organizations that were helping refugees. So all those organizations are in the process of shutting down. And then, but no one ever found any actual fraud or money laundering that I'm aware of.
A lot of those groups get a lot of their money from the government.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So when they're scrutinized like that,
Yeah.
they probably should maybe not take the money.
Well, then the catch is who's going to do it. I mean, and that happens in a lot of ways. Things like foster care, and that we might talk about that on some other things. Again, that's a government program run by nonprofits, and so some Lutheran groups and Catholic groups have pulled out of doing foster care because of the government mandating that you have to allow same-sex couples to adopt through foster care, have placements that way. But then who's doing the foster care if the churches aren't doing it? So that's something you do have to wrestle with and figure out, okay, should we just not do it and not mess with the problem, but then how is the problem getting solved in other ways? And so challenge with immigration, challenge with some other things too. All right, we're about out of time, so we can get ready for second service. Next week, Deaconess intern Ruth Ann Grabow from the Perry Lutheran Homes will be here, and she'll be sharing especially about what she's spent her internship year doing, but maybe give some advice on what to do when you're visiting people in nursing homes or taking that for yourself. So thank you. Yeah, Connie.
I want to say something very, very short.
Okay.
Iowa desperately needs immigrants because we use trouble.
Yeah. Yep.
What did you say? I said Iowa desperately needs immigrants because we are losing population. We know that. And to be here now, because strong, we need more people to come to Iowa to work.
Right, and we see that with Iowa State too, that it's, the best and brightest come from all over the world to study here. And if they're coming to Iowa State, they're usually pretty studious. I've heard people working with international students in New York or something. They're not always here to learn. They're here to make connections and party. If you're coming to Iowa State, you're probably here to learn. But then now again, visa issues and things. If we don't let them in the first place, or we don't make it so there's no way they can stay once they're done, how do we balance that? How should that work out? So more other things to just kind of think and pray about. But again, thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you next week.
What I'm upset about